His objectives were to describe the area, what you see on the ground, and make some assessments of existing and potential threats to the ecological integrity of the area. David will provide a virtual tour of Sandy Lake and present his major conclusions about what he now sees as a major ecological and recreational asset for HRM. David has retired from his position as professor of biology at Dalhousie University in 2008. Since then, he's been active in several natural history and hiking groups with a focus on the Chebucto Peninsula. Over to you, David.
Most of what I'm going to present is it's on this website, sandylakebedford.ca. When I did a lot of different types of observations, and I'm quite used to working in the web medium, and I just found it easiest to put it all on a website that I can update and has links and all the rest of it. And then there's also information that's available on the sandylake.org and the Sandy Lake Coalition, so between the three of them. And I will get the slide set posted here eventually, sooner than later probably. The concept of Sandy Lake as a regional park, as Karen will tell you, was really goes back 50 years, 71, when the Sandy Lake area was selected as one of 7 unique jewels in the crown of the Halifax region. I actually have that old report. I always use it. It's kind of basic reference on what's around Halifax. One of 7 priority areas to be protected for their ecological richness and for community education and recreation. Plans were developed for the Sandy Lake Regional Park at that time. So it's actually an old concept. It's been a long time and hopefully being realized. It's that original concept, and it was to have some lands around Sandy Lake protected as a conservation area, and of course there was much less development around there at the time. What did happen in the interim was that these lands were acquired by HRM, and Walter was involved in that. And of course the Lions Club set up the Sandy Lake Beach Park in 2001. And then in 2006, as part of the first regional plan, these were kind of integrated as the so-called Jack Lake Regional Park, which still has not been formally designated. So it's called a regional park. And these regional parks, the idea is that they have attributes that are important to all of HRM, not just to the local area. So that was identified as Jack Lake Regional Park. The now proposed Sandy Lake Regional Park is basically, these are HRM lands here, plus another, all this is comprised of about 1,000 acres, plus about another 1,000 acres on this side of the lake. Because what was missing from that part of the protection was all the land over here. And the reasons for wanting to add that are, as I mentioned, are historical. Secondly, protection of the Sandy Lake to Sackville River watercourse, which goes down here through Marsh Lake and into the Sackville River, for the protection of migratory fish. There's anadromous, seagoing species in that system. Reptiles, amphibians, waterfowl, otters, and for the water quality and aquatic recreation in Sandy Lake, and also to reduce downstream flooding down here. That's one. Second major reason. Second was to provide a forested wildlife corridor connecting lands of the Chebucto Peninsula, which are down here, with the central and eastern mainland over here. So a kind of a connectivity function. So that's the reasons for wanting to expand the park beyond what it is now. This is the Sackville River Watershed, which I think people here are quite familiar with, and the Sandy Lake Watershed, which comprises most of these lands, but not all of the lands that are proposed to be protected. They actually involve, I think, 4 different watersheds. This is the Sandy Lake Watershed here, or the Big Sandy Lake, as we sometimes use to distinguish it from Small Sandy Lake, which I think is it that one? I'm not sure. Yes. That one over there. By this map is the biggest sub-watershed of the Sackville River watershed. So obviously you could expect that it'll have an important impact on the flooding and so on downstream, and also it's very important in relation to the efforts to clean up the Sackville River system and get salmon going in it and so on and so forth. It's important habitat for these species. And I should just say that most of what I'm talking about, I've really only learned in about the last year and a half. I was familiar with the area. I actually first met Walter, I think, in 2009, on some event related to the Greenway. And I had been to Sandy Lake a couple of times in the past, but it wasn't until last June that I really started to look at the area as a result of interacting with Karen and Derek and others. So I'm kind of giving you an outsider's impression, looking at it through my lens. Just one. Okay, now this is the map from the recent floodplain study, and they lump the watersheds, all the watersheds in this area, into one sub-watershed. So by those criteria, this is actually the second largest sub-watershed. Not that I think it makes a lot of difference, but just as a matter of fact here. And this shows you, this is actually when I first met Walter in 2009. We had this field event. That's what was happening that day. It was a wonderful kind of demonstration of the whole thing. Here's the little brown water from the little Sackville River coming in, joining the big Sackville River, and here's the flooding downstream. So that made quite an impression. It stuck with me at the time. And this is the recent report that I'm talking about, with which Walter is super pleased for various reasons. And it is really exceptionally good report with one big problem to me. They did not model the impacts of development in the Sandy Lake area. And I went to a meeting with the people who did it. I said, well, why didn't they? And he said, well, HRM gave us the specifications to model. And he said they must have assumed that there would be no significant development in that area for another 100 years. So that's missing from the model, for the impacts of development here on this whole process. Anyway, these are just some notes I made from my meeting with them, a few of the things, and they acknowledge that eutrophication is a big issue. They kind of insist when you talk to them that we can have development, we can mitigate all the issues, and it's not going to cause any problems with flow and all the rest of it. It's the standard kind of answer. They do acknowledge that's an issue, and they do acknowledge that they did not model the impacts of development in the Sandy Lake sub-watershed, which to me seems to be a huge omission. Mm-hmm. Anyway, one question to ask them, I guess, next week.
Are there plans to develop around Sandy Lake?
Yes, I'm coming to that.
Yeah.
So again, a little bit more detail here. This is the Sandy Lake watershed. These are the lands that are proposed for protection. This whole area. These are the DND lands sitting in here. These show you all of the the major streams coming into Big Sandy Lake, and you can see that most of them are on this western side. That's the side that's not protected. And obviously that's going to have a big impact on the surface water. This is an area of potential acid slate input that's probably affected it in the past. You know, when you expose the acid slates, you can have this huge rush of acid, and it can kill everything in the lake. Mm-hmm. It usually does. So these are concerns about these waters coming in from this direction. And there's these other smaller watersheds involved here. One component of the combined Jack Lake, Sandy Lake lands is Jack Lake, which is an entirely different watershed, that drains into the paper mill lake system. There's a little bit over here, Marine Brook, which drains directly into the Sackville River, and then there's some lands up here. And so they want to protect this for the lake, and then also this whole area is envisaged as a wildlife corridor, going from the Chebucto Peninsula onto the Nova Scotia mainland. Of concern to the Sandy Lake Conservation Association is the prospect that 892 acres zoned urban settlement just west of Sandy Lake could be developed to accommodate 12,000 residents. So that's the concern. We could have as many as 12,000 residents into this area, and if you remember from the previous slide, that's where all those water's going in there, and then there's also, of course, these acid slates up there. that's a big issue in terms of protection of the lake system and also the wildlife corridor. This connectivity issue in a bit better perspective. This is the Chebucto, we call it Chebucto Peninsula if you connect the line from the upper part of the Bedford Basin to the upper part of St. Margaret's Bay and draw a line. That's a peninsula. And it turns out, fortuitously and not both, it's really, the Chebucto Peninsula has become a very significant conservation area. There's a high proportion of protected lands there, parks, and crown lands there. And it's really become a very significant conservation area, but it's isolated. And we're starting to see the effects of fragmentation of natural habitats. And if it remains isolated, that really threatens the ecological integrity of that whole area. And so with the recent Green Network Plan, they identified these corridors going off the Chebucto Peninsula. And these ones actually around Sandy Lake were, I can't remember the terminology they used for it, but I have it there. They're not kind of main corridors, but auxiliary. But really, it should be a main corridor because this one really goes that direction. You need this one to go that direction. But the main point is, it's important what happens here around the neck of the peninsula. And people say, well, what about there's so much development there? The thing is that the more habitat you can have, things will move over spaces and move over roads, but the longer the distance there is, the less probability they're going to get across. And there's always the opportunity at some time in the future we might want to retrofit some of these settled areas to make more connectivity. But it does matter what we do with these lands along the neck. It matters a lot, and that's why in a regional context that's a very important issue. I encouraged Karen and company, Sandy Lake Conservation Association, to try and get some drone pictures last fall, which they did. They got a wonderful set of drone pictures, and it really gives a good impression of the area at large. And basically we're talking about water and forest. That's kind of main message there, and we're talking about it kind of sandwiched between settled areas. So the next few slides just give this aerial impression. So here we are, Sandy Lake Beach Park, Bedford Basin down in here. These are all these Jack Lake lands. This is mixed, and this is lovely because it's in the fall. I also thought they should do it exactly that time of year because you could basically identify the species here by the colors of the trees. So it's a typical mixed Acadian forest with areas of more softwoods and areas of more hardwoods and so on. It's really a wonderful forest. Looking north towards Peveril's Brook up here, which goes down here through Marsh Lake and then into the Sackville River. Here's the Marsh Lake. It's absolutely beautiful lake here. And I'll show you a picture of it later. When you get in there, if you haven't been in there, you could be hundreds of miles from anywhere. It's really quite pristine in there. And it is literally a marsh lake. And this is one of the power lines here. View to the northwest again with the power lines. And you see the forested landscape. Now this is the view on view west. This is the big Clearcut that was made in 2013. This is part of the area that could be developed.
Was this the part of the jail, where the jail was?
No, that's on the Jack Lake lands.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Looking southwest, this is towards the dairy.
You said that was clear cut. It looked like it was clear cut, but for what reason?
That's a little bit of a story unto itself, but the owner at the time, was, as I understand it, was ticked off at the city and decided to show his muscle and clear cut it.
Holy cow.
But the point is, it is private land, and it is part of the urban settlement land, and legally is on the route to development. But ecologically, and there were effects that I'll show you later. It's clear cutting. There's a stream that comes down through here, I think, and a lot of this shallowing stuff out here is because of movement of debris from the clear cutting down into the lake. So it did have effects on it. Yeah, I've got some pictures on the ground, and I just wanted to give a little bit kind of the superficial geology here. So here we're looking at Sandy Lake. So we got the Chebucto Peninsula down here, and then, you know, a lot of the Chebucto Peninsula and all this area down here is a lot of exposed bedrock, and it's the hard maguma slates and so on, the Halifax Formation. We get further down the granites and so on, very rough kinds of rock. And then this stuff here, which has these with it, that you get these series of ridges in the rocks. You can see them in people's backyards and so on. And then when we get into here, we get a different formation, and then this is going into this big drumlin field, which goes up through central Nova Scotia, through Mount Uniacke and so on. And so we've got these big drumlins around Sandy Lake, and that's what makes it quite a, and these have quite rich tills and so on in them, and that gives this whole forest and the lake system a different quality than the ones on the Chebucto Peninsula. It's a higher pH lake, there's more calcium going into it, and the forest has things like sugar maple on it, which you don't get in the much more acidic systems. And that's part of the transition to the central mainland. And that's what you're getting into this area. I'm going to just show you a few pictures to kind of highlight what's there and what really, somebody who really didn't know the area, what really excited me about it. And this area here, this is one Walter said I had to go visit. And it's, yeah, we're right here. And he said there's beautiful, beautiful hemlocks in there, and it is really spectacular. And it's what's called the Marine Brook area. And there's a series of ridges, and you climb up these ridges, and then there's little valleys, and you climb up another set, and there's just absolutely beautiful hemlocks and moss-covered floor. And they're really, really beautiful. And this just shows the topography going across a series of ridges here. This is done from Google Earth map. This is where this transect goes. And then there's a lovely big drumlin right up here. Beautiful, beautiful forest on it. I mean, I could talk the whole night about some of these sites. Coming back down. Now there's what they call the water road. When you come back down here, almost parallel to the By High, walk down the water road, and then you come to the road that goes into the. Somebody just asked me about it, where they were going to situate the old jail, and that's what you see there. It's really interesting.
This is the one with the gate on it, off the Hammonds Road.
Yes, that's the water road, and then if you go up the water road towards this direction, then there's a road off to the left going inland, and that's the one I'm talking about. This goes up to the old jail. And you know, these are major thoroughfares. Now, and to me, has like tremendous potential, and there's bits of history strung around them. I just find it really fascinating. And this is the when they scraped the ground for the jail yard, they really did a good job, and it really hasn't regenerated much. But my first thought when I went in there, and I just thought, one thought came to my head. I thought, amphitheater. What a wonderful place for big summer events outdoors. There's roads right into it. It's a huge area. It's kind of out in nature, and it's one of the big potentials that I see in this whole area. Very close to that is Jack Lake. Jack Lake looks like a boreal lake. You know, it's got the black spruce very low. The water's very acidic. You know, the whole area is riddled with old forestry roads. There was a lot of forestry down at one time. Riddled with trails. This is a map of trails and so on around. These are like informally constructed trails. There's the power lines going through these areas, where they show here, these things here. And the thing is, these are all potential, really open up the area to me to different types of recreational use. So they're big, big attributes of the area. This is a little bit on Peveril's Brook. I mean, absolutely beautiful. There's a little bit of an ATV route through here, and it's just serene walking through there with this hemlock line stream. And this is on the power line up about up here somewhere, I think, in the fall time. You know, really beautiful, very accessible lands, and that's a big part of it. A winter shot, as you probably know, dog walking is quite popular there, even in winter, and the lands are used in all different seasons. And this is beautiful in winter as it is in summer. This is Sandy Lake with people boating and swimming. In fact, this is one of my favorite shots. a father and his son out there just in their bathing suits and casting in. I saw them catch, several smallmouth bass. It's an invasive species, and one way to keep it down is to fish them. A little bit of the different lakes, and some of the streams and so on. And I should say, one of the things that really intrigued me about the area when I first came out and visited, Derek is here. Derek pointed down to the water and said, look out there, and they were Gasbro, the shallow water. I never had any idea that Gasbro came up anywhere near Halifax. So these fish are coming up those streams and so on and spawning in the lake. That's Marsh Lake, very, very different kind of lake, Sandy Lake and Jack Lake. So they're quite distinct lakes. And these are snapping turtles, Clarence Stevens leading a little group to put some of these snapping turtles back in the lake. Talk a little bit about that. So I'm just trying to give an overall impression here. And I was really impressed with the aquatic life, especially after working on the Chebucto Peninsula, when so many of these areas are almost dead. And they're dead for two reasons. One is they're naturally very acidic, but then acid rain has really hit those poorly buffered areas very hard. And when I did a couple of years ago, did a survey in the Williams Lake backlands, hundreds and hundreds of vernal ponds and stuff there. One out of maybe 50 or 60 had any amphibians in it. This place is crawling with amphibians and reptiles because it's maintained a favorable pH. Many of these mussels in there, which are eaten by otter and beavers and everything else. Derek showed me this bit of pickerelweed. She said he had seen the beavers eating that. So it's a very, very rich system. That's just Marsh Lake. Again, when I pointed out, when you go back in here, the only signs of civilization is that cut for the power line up there. Absolutely serene and beautiful there. Again, just some of the streams and so on and surface waters. This is kind of interesting because this was in 2017. This is in 2018, and what happened in the meantime was, during that time, was the beavers put 4 dams on that Peveril's Brook, and raised the water level of the lake about 2 feet. For better or for worse, I don't know, but they certainly had an impact on it. And that's again that lovely view on Peveril's Brook. And then what really got me excited, I mean, beside that, all that I told you, were the forests. And I was really just blown away to discover such a magnificent mixed Acadian forest with lots of big old trees in it. Now the whole area was forested at one time, but in the old days they didn't have GPS, and they didn't have helicopters, and they didn't have this and that, and they just didn't take everything out. And some spots got left either deliberately or by accident, and there's patches of old growth all through that forest back there. And as I'll talk about, there's a lot of these, what they call pits and mounds, and you can see some very sizable trees. One of my favorite ones, and this is where Derek took me the first day I came out, the so-called peninsula, which belongs to Sandy Lake Academy. And just a magnificent grove of hemlocks you can't believe. It's like a cathedral in there. And these are over 200 years old, these trees. Okay, now this large area up here was clear cut in 2013. That was old growth. There's many, many big stumps in there of trees well over 100 years old. They did leave these strips here, and those areas have some of that vestigial forest, of course, with big edge effects, and those have some of the big trees. Here's the clear cut looking from across Sandy Lake. They did cut very close to the stream in some places. Here they wanted to cross that stream, and they just cut right down to the stream. And a lot of stuff did go into the lake, and this is what came in. And that's up in this northwestern part of the lake. And that is a type of eutrophication. There's no question that adds to the oxygen consumption, nutrient loads, and so on and so forth. So that wasn't a free pass as far as the lake's concerned. And if you develop it, 12,000 people, it's hard to envisage that's not going to have
A major impact.
major impacts.